Why don't we kick things off?
Perfect.
My name's Gary Rowe. I'm CEO and a principal consulting analyst with a company called TechVision Research. I appreciate the opportunity to be involved in this session with Jackson Shaw in Clear Skye. This is a topic that has resonated with us for years and years. It's obviously been accelerated just given what has happened over the last couple of years. But we will start with kind of a high-level top-down perspective and then really dive into details as I turn it over to Jackson.
There you go. I think I have to be here. There we go.
So just some quick background on myself and Jackson. I've been in this area for probably 30 plus years. I helped run a company called Burton Group that got sold to Gartner, was co-president of what's now Gartner for Technical Professionals, have built and sold several companies, and have probably engaged with hundreds and hundreds of companies over the years in consulting and doing primary research. I've personally developed probably 100 research reports that touch on identity management and governance and new digital enterprises, all end user focused. And we'll try to leverage a lot of that today. And Jackson?
I'm Jackson Shaw, and I've been in this business maybe about as long as Gary has been. We've both been good friends for an awful long time. The Burton Group was instrumental back in, believe it or not, 1996, when I was at Zoom Corporation, telling us your next platform needs to be Windows. And the rest was history from there. We were acquired by Microsoft in 99, moved, all of our Canadian guys moved down to Redmond, and I worked at Microsoft for 5 years. And then after that, a startup that did Unix, Linux bridge integration using Kerberos and single sign-on, and then went off to Quest and One Identity and Dell and back to One Identity and ForcePoint, and now with Clear Skye as Chief Strategy Officer. And I'm delighted to be here with Gary, and he and I have been talking about this for a while and wanting to do this session in person as a different thing than doing everything in our, as I say, in our COVID bunkers. But really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. I hope you guys all enjoy it, and we'll try to save some time at the end for some questions. Let's see if I can get this right. There we go.
So what we'll cover today, as I said earlier, it's, we're taking a bigger picture look at what we call this new digital enterprise. Right. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means, not only for your enterprise, but how it affects and impacts IT organizations. So we have some recommendations and some thinking in terms of how IT needs to change. We'll then talk about what TechVision has developed over the years. And we've developed reference architectures and identity and security in privileged access management and all kinds of areas. But we're taking this bigger picture view, and it'll give you a tool and maybe a context to think about, to take a look more broadly at this new digital enterprise and a reference architecture to support it.
Right.
Jackson and I will then talk a little bit about, post-pandemic, this new normal. What does it mean for identity and governance? What should you as enterprises be thinking about there? And then I'll turn it over to Jackson, who will talk about, specifically what they're doing at Clear Skye to drive this and to support a lot of the things I'll be talking about. So with that, let's
get started.
Let's kick this off. So in 2022, what do we need to be thinking about? And a lot of what's up here are the technologies and the building blocks that we've been thinking about for the last 5 years or so. The pandemic and this digital acceleration has kind of changed things. But if you think about it, things like cloud computing, TechVision did a report about 5 years ago that John Millars and I call the end of EA and IT as we know it, or no IT. And we looked at the cloudification of IT, the influence of these technologies, how that was going to drive new business models. And of course, everything is accelerated. So cloud and blockchain or distributed ledger technology, the advent of mobile everywhere, IoT, where there are sensors and devices and ways to kind of track things globally, billions and trillions of IoT devices that need to be brought into this. And then the ability to manage that through artificial intelligence and machine learning. What this leaves us with is that we want to think, it is incumbent upon enterprises to radically rethink how we use technologies. The opportunities are amazing. And when we think about the new digital enterprise, we want to think about this potential for innovation as well as disruption. So again, staying pretty high level, when we think about digital technology, as people process data, things, digital is, as again, the world's seen, it's not just technologists over the last couple of years, as the world has seen, these things are being brought together. And when we think about how we want to model this going forward, people, it's anywhere, it's in context, it's connected. You need information and connections to be able to figure that out. All kinds of processes, integration, automation, all kinds of IoT devices. But at the center point is data and information. How do we find information? How do we share? How is it intelligently communicated? And how do these pieces play together? So when we think about this radical change in thinking, it's not just the technology, it's IT, and it's how things are structured. And if you think about old kind of legacy IT, and old still is new in some organizations, but over the last 40 years, IT was this centralized
kind of stovepipe.
Waterfall development environment, big applications and so forth. And IT in this new digital age with all these technologies and these things we're talking about are going to move from responding to the next big thing to curating, to leveraging this incredible amount of data that's out there today. We can clear up. I can't see a little piece of the slide. Okay. Just clear. Okay. So I'd rather see the slide than myself. So as we're looking at moving from responders to curators, let's look at this at each level. At a principal level, everything in the old days was centralized, right? Ownership, central delivery, whole feature sets, big monolithic things. As we look at new IT and where we're going, it's alignment with business. It's agile, it's flexible, it's trying to meet these business goals. From a governance perspective, which Jackson will talk about in greater detail, from a governance perspective, it goes from this distributed oversight, protect, only, make certain things accessible, to pervasive, to coordinated, to real time. But what's interesting is we're distributing things, we're decentralizing things, we're making it democratic and more highly available, but that creates substantially greater risk. So while we're doing that, from the governance perspective, we need the central oversight. We need to protect. We need to make sure it's pervasive and consistently available. In terms of focus, we're moving from managed, command and control kinds of things to technology being a facilitator, this innovation mindset. And if you look at a lot of the organizations that have had tremendous success over the last several years, it's been those that have been able to innovate, that have leveraged technology. User experience, and we've talked about this for a long time, but during the pandemic, of course, we see this everywhere. User the individual consumer, that's application developers, its partners, and so forth. So how do we achieve this in this curative environment? It's integration, it's interfacing, it's leveraging tech seamlessly wherever possible. Going down this stack, innovation,
Right.
And innovation is changing from one big thing to incremental experimentation. And again, the technology infrastructure allows us to be able to do that. And last but not least, and Jackson will touch on this later as well, is we go from self-contained products with licenses and upgrade cycles to components that interoperate with one another, to platform builds, to core sets of capabilities that can be integrated and built together.
Mm-hmm.
So what does this mean? From a governance perspective, just to recap, centralized oversight, pervasive accessibility and accountability, management, business-driven, opportunistic, responsive, data that is not limited to storage media, metadata, tagging, lots of additional information, any place, anytime, anywhere, accessibility, better user experience, increased functionality, and relevant functionality, automated, outcome aligned, tied in with the business, persistent learning, implementations that are faster, agile, flexible. Years ago, we'd have deployment cycles that took years. They need to take weeks now or days. Exactly. And then platforms, federations, cloud, microservices, basically all of these opportunities to basically provide integrated user experiences.
Right.
And let's
Yeah, there you
see. And so to just net this out, digital business is all about applications, automation, integration, platforms, analytics, and intelligence coming together. We'll drive this across work, we'll drive this across information. And as we, so as we net this out, and as we think about this new digital enterprise, we want to think about, a reference architecture. And at TechVision, we've applied this to a couple of things that are a little bit different. We applied this to innovation. How do you innovate? And how do you systematize that and think about it from an architectural perspective? And the same thing, with something that's obviously very big. So if you dig a layer deeper than that, we then have integration and deployment, security, identity and access management, and then the whole risk area and compliance and supporting, CCPA and GDPR in all of these areas. So we build out the digital stack and we have these layers around it. And then we can dig a layer deeper. In this, I think is food for thought, because much like, when we're building our identity programs or our security programs or other things, we have a set of elements that we want to holistically look at. We want to build to try to make sure we have the right security posture and the right controls in place and the right identity information. From a bigger picture digital enterprise perspective, we're going to want the security and identity stuff that you see on the left. We're going to want to have the right policies, the right risk management capabilities, the right discovery capabilities that you see on the bottom, the right interfaces. Remember, we're going to be leveraging a lot of technologies that are out there. Some's on-prem, some's in the cloud. It's going to be, some may be generated from your customers, your partners. So we're going to want to have the right digital stack to be able to integrate all of these different kinds of environments, the ability to integrate these various applications, the ability to tie in critical services and critical capabilities built on platforms with the right underlying infrastructure. And again, in this short webinar, all I want to do here is to give you a sense for an approach to take in thinking about the new digital enterprise from the perspective of some of these new IT models and this new thinking that we've been talking about.
Right, exactly.
So let's now, before I turn it over to Jackson, let's talk a little bit about, so I started big picture, and I want to now bring this down because the reality is, the world as we know it has changed. And we do want to begin to think about it from an IAM perspective, and just at least share some of the thinking that Jackson and I have been talking about with respect to, how does this affect identity and access management? How does it affect, which Jackson will talk about a little bit more, on new governance models and IGA and so forth.
Right.
And let me start with some basic lessons in thinking that we've had working with a lot of large companies over the last few years. One of the things I always think about is, growing up, although we're in Southern California now, growing up in the North, and I know in New England they're going to get hit today, and that is where I grew up. And there was a lesson learned when I started driving, which is when you go into a skid, you don't overcorrect. And you just kind of let it flow for a while, and then gradually kind of move back to what the new normal is. And I think when we think about that type of lesson with respect to the pandemic, there are a lot of lessons learned, but we want to make sure everything hasn't changed. We're going to find a comfortable spot in between over the next 18 months or so. So the pandemic will dissipate. So we're starting to see enterprises evaluating extended work at home programs beside the pandemic. A lot of large companies we've worked with are trying to figure out, should we be spending $1 billion a year in real estate and buildings and so forth? And I suspect we'll fall somewhere in the middle. And, there are areas where there's been tremendous efficiencies. And in fact, you might not need to go to a physical office. In other cases, there's tremendous value there. And that's one of the reasons, despite the technical glitches,
why we wanted to do this.
We wanted to just get together and talk to one another and try to work through some of these things. Automation, innovation, and disruption need to be accommodated. And we'll talk about this a little bit at the end, and Jackson will touch on that. But the ability to automate, the ability to do things at scale and do it faster is going to be really important. In identity, in security, and in IT at large. There were some lessons that, having worked with a lot of big companies at the point where the pandemic was kind of kicking off, so to speak, we had the opportunity to personally observe two things. Those that had the strong, flexible, scalable, adaptive, IAM foundation were able to make their way through it better. Those that, just had a mishmash of things and, were challenged anyways, were paralyzed during this period and really had to do some things to try to get out of that. So going forward, it's actually going to be a great time for organizations to just take a hard look at your IAM foundation, fine-tune things, figure out for you, because it'll be different everywhere, what that new normal is. Take a look at your foundation, take a look at it in the context, and we have that bigger picture view of the digital enterprise, figure out how IAM can best support that. And last but not least, I believe one of the single biggest missing elements, if you will, as we kind of had this digital engagement that was brought on, very suddenly.
Mhm.
One of the biggest missing elements was governance.
Mhm.
And I think if we think through over the next several years, what's going to be necessary to not just have a digital enterprise, but to have a safe and secure digital enterprise, it's going to be that mapping to our ability to control, manage, and govern this underlying foundation.
Right, right.
So Jackson, I know you want to say a few things about this,
Sure.
and then I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll
Sure.
get back together.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a really interesting discussion. And when I first started talking to Gary about it, it sort of came out of a lot of, in some ways, our shared history, but things I've seen since I've been in the business. And when I first started, I mean, this is a sort of a great slide over the last 20 years. I mean, when I first started in the business, silos were very, very common. I mean, they're still common, but just in context, back then they were very common. Everything was done through, ETL, export, transform, and load into different systems, right? And there was very little API access. I mean, I just remember the days of COM and DCOM and, all those crazy things we had to do to try to move things from one place to another. But, I guess it was about 2005 when we first started to see SaaS come into the world, the cloud, and it's become much more prevalent. It's been disrupting legacy apps, but problems and still exist with this. And I just want to share some of the things that I've seen over the past number of years. Like today, as I said before, we started with a bunch of silos. I think if you want to really even say anything, we still got those silos and we've got more now. And I feel where we are today, and Gary talked a little bit about user experiences, the customer experience, the user experience, the employee experience have just got even more disjointed. Mm-hmm. And this is something that, myself and others that have been paying attention to this have heard customers tell us, but we've had very little control over. And kind of, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but kind of one of the things that was really a liminal moment for me was when I started hearing more and more customers say to us as identity experts, whether I was at One Identity or Dell or Microsoft or what have you, it was like, can you make the user experience look like this? And the this in that particular case was ServiceNow. And when I would dig into that with customers, it would be, well, our partners, our vendors, our employees know that user experience. They're familiar with it. We don't want to train them on something new, which really did key something with me. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Today, last time, 20 years ago, we didn't have a ton of APIs. Now we have a ton of APIs, and that's good and bad. The good is we've got a lot of ways to move things from one silo to another. The bad is we've got a lot of APIs, and we're at the point now where organizations are trying to figure out, how do I secure those APIs? How do I protect those APIs against denial of service? It's amazing. There are islands of automation everywhere. I mean, in all honesty, if I look just at the identity and access management side of the world, almost weekly, if not monthly, we see a situation where an IAM or an IGA vendor has come out with another automation package or a different automation package. Here's how you do workflow with us. And we've gone from almost having no automation capability. Now we're at a point where many companies have too many automation capabilities. It's almost like having automation silos, right? There's an impedance mismatch between cloud and on-prem capabilities. When I was trying to do this before, when we were at One Identity and some of the other companies I've worked at, we all had on-premise IAM and IGA products, and we were building the equivalent in the cloud, and the features and functionalities never worked. And how did you get a customer from one on-prem to in the cloud? All really, really difficult things. So it's just, these problems haven't gone away despite SaaS being there. And this is something I just came across this, probably 4 or 5 months ago, and it really rang a bell with me. And I hope this is new for you, because I don't think a lot of people think about it. There is a cost of context switching for employees every day. when you're sitting there, like me, I spend most of my time fooling around with Excel and doing PowerPoint and being in Outlook. And all of that's great because the UI, the user experience is all pretty much the same because I'm in this Microsoft suite of products. But I then have to switch into, HubSpot, or I have to switch into our HR system, or I have to flip into a different CRM solution, or any of the other different systems we're using, and you have this context switching. And this is going on every day and getting worse at a lot of companies because, as I say here, more niche and narrow SaaS tools are being deployed to address specific pain points. Even in our company, we add another SaaS tool. It's yet another user interface that folks have to figure out. How do you help? How do you use this? How do you enter things? All a little bit different. The number of applications have generally exploded. We haven't reduced the number of applications. If anything, we've increased them, right? Employee collaborations and workflows are really splintered. The way you work in one product, the way you do workflows and you do automation in one product is different than the next. Again, it just is disruptive and it's not helping productivity. And if you go to a company, even a small one like us, and you say, where's your business core? It's pretty hard to answer that question. And in a bigger company, it's almost impossible because there's been shadow IT. There's all kinds of different systems that are out there. It's really tough to know what the business core is. So I think this is a huge thing that a lot of people aren't thinking about. But when you actually start talking to the more cognizant CXOs, folks, they do understand that there's a huge cost around this, and they're trying to figure out how they can reduce context switching because it increases employee productivity ultimately. But while we've been sitting back and this is all exploding around us, and we're trying to get to the bottom of things, there are other macro forces that are at work that are above and beyond us. One of them is digital transformation, or the digital enterprise, which you've talked about. How do you unlock employee and customer value? This kind of goes back to the previous slide, but just in general, we want to get more out of employees, and that doesn't mean work them more, right? What can we do to help them? How can we make things less, how can we reduce friction? How can we make things more seamless? And another thing that you hear a lot more is how do we connect and align the company and the strategies across everybody? This isn't just, the business department and the IT people anymore and all the different groups. It's how do we get everybody working together? Because if we can align everybody around the business and around the strategy, it's something that's going to be a positive move for the company generally. This is also very new, the low-code business developer. If you're not thinking a little bit about this, or you don't know much about low-code, no-code, I would invite you to do a little bit of reading about this. This is how, in the future, the business, and by the business I mean the company at the top level, is going to be able to get more sort of hands on the wheel with respect to designing things. It's by having low-code, low-code, no-code platforms, so that we can bring in our business peers to help us with things. We all have done this with IGA and IEM, where we've had to go and we've get business partners involved and we work with the business closely. But the next step of that is not just talking to them and working with them, but it's actually getting them involved and helping design the processes, right? We want this sort of more flexible resourcing across a company, less reliance on outside outsourcers. Like I've been doing identity for so long, and you see when a customer moves from one vendor to another vendor, they have to basically throw out everything they learned, bring in new vendors, bring in new training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like a whole revolution where you're going from, riding a bicycle to a car, from a car back to, a bicycle or a tractor or something. So anything where we can sort of reduce some of these problems through, the new digital enterprise that Gary was talking about, I think would be positive for a company. So what has really got me engaged, around the thinking here is my sort of calling it the rise of the digital, the rise of the platform, or in Gary's parlance, the digital enterprise, is how do we have a platform, or how could we leverage a platform that allows us to work smarter and faster, deliver more engaging experiences, automate work for everyone, and basically connect the enterprise. And it's been literally over the last 5, 6, 7 years, but certainly the last few number of years, that for me and the folks at Skye, where we've really seen ServiceNow evolve as a platform. And one of the key things I think we've been witnessing is how companies that have made a strategic investment in ServiceNow are leveraging a lot of these capabilities that I show here between the brace brackets, like the APIs and the integration capability. For example, the ServiceNow Integration Hub has something like 200 different connectors. They've got the ability to do access reviews and access requests, and they've got a common portal that everyone is using. They've got built-in workflow, built-in reporting. And on top of the sort of the IT service management capabilities, they've got all these capabilities around governance, risk and compliance, security ops, HR service delivery. And all of this is connected with the folks that use the portal and use the products, and at the same time, through integration, the ability to connect to mobile devices and all of these other things I show on the bottom. I mean, one of the things I love about this is if you build something on top of ServiceNow, it works on an iPad, it works on a mobile phone, it works on your desktop. It's all just common kind of capabilities. We've spent a lot of time working with ServiceNow and on the platform and building special integration, for example, into things like SAP and their GRC product and SAP integration in particular, because it's in use by so many systems. Epic is another great example where, from a healthcare perspective, you know, from an IGA perspective with either healthcare or something like SAP, you need to really understand those back-end systems and to be able to integrate with them to surface them from a governance and risk and compliance perspective and an identity governance perspective. So, you know, the end of this for us is how much of this common platform can we use in ServiceNow to be able to take all the benefits that customers are getting today from ServiceNow and extend it to them from an identity governance perspective, right? So in our particular instance, we're looking at the digital enterprise as instantiated by ServiceNow, right? And I think one of the key things for us is we have many customers and many ServiceNow customers that we've talked to who are putting significant amounts of money and betting their corporate strategy on ServiceNow. And that's really what we're trying to achieve with our product is build that digital enterprise, so to speak, on top of ServiceNow, use all the capabilities that they have in the product that they're delivering, instead of us reinventing the workflow wheel or the, you know, various different integration wheels. And again, the fact that ServiceNow has all these capabilities and builds this common data plane, whether it's in ServiceNow itself or it's connected to ServiceNow, gives us tremendous access to data. Like if you think of things like risk, how can we better work with risk inside of ServiceNow if we're connected to it and on the system? And we just have a tremendous number of advantages there. We love it. So we're, you know, as I say here, we're basically a born in the cloud. Well, we're born in the cloud because we're running on ServiceNow, which is a cloud app. Identity governance as a SaaS product on top of ServiceNow. We're 100% native to and built on the platform. We don't actually sit at the side in a different cloud or, you know, on one of the other cloud providers and integrate. We're actually sitting on top of ServiceNow as a built on now application. And that's, I think, really key for us and for our customers, is to be on that platform, to be managed in some ways by ServiceNow, and to sit on ServiceNow and leverage all of their capabilities, their compliance, their ability to roll out data centers. I mean, we just get all those great benefits. Again, something our customers don't have to worry about, you know, from the perspective of how do they expand their IGA solution. It's all handled for by ServiceNow. So we're really excited about the potential with ServiceNow. We think it's a great platform for a digital enterprise, as Gary's been talking about. And we're looking forward to bring this to even more customers, as I mentioned. And I think we're going to get to a wrap-up slide here, and we'll have time for some questions, hopefully. Hopefully there's still some people on after these glitches. So, I mean, with that, Gary, do we want to talk a little bit more about?
Yeah, so it's identity and access management, the new normal. It's also governance, and I'll suggest there's one other thing we want to think about relative to governance, and that's what, and we've had discussions about it. It's what I've been characterizing as pragmatic IGA.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the lessons that frankly we should have learned, it's funny, we have lessons up here from 2020, and here's what we want to do in 2022. In the late 90s, there were lessons learned in that you need to do one of two things. You need to either have fewer silos,
Mm-hmm.
or you need to integrate those silos in some logical way.
Mm-hmm.
And, so by building on an enterprise platform you already have, in leveraging those capabilities, that's the most straightforward solution. So to be able to do that in the context of something you already have, to me makes tremendous sense. And one of the reasons I'm here today.
Right. Well, what I do like about this platform is just how everything is abstracted away from the owner of the application, right? Like, so many of the firms that are out there that are delivering solutions like this, they start down the road of things like Kubernetes and DevOps, and how do they secure their containers and all of this. And to me, that's just like, in all honesty, it's not just because we're leveraging ServiceNow. I just feel that I don't want customers to worry about that. Like, this should be just transparent. Here's what I need to do. Can my digital enterprise handle it? Can my platform handle it? And that's why I'm really bullish, and how I came up with this term rise of the platform from that perspective. And it's not to say that Microsoft isn't a platform or Amazon isn't a platform, but I mean, if you really look at it from the perspective of what you talked about from a digital enterprise perspective, do they have all those components in their platforms? And can you easily integrate and manage with all those? And I think if a customer actually, or our friends in the audience actually thought about it a little, you would realize that a lot of those things can't be done on Microsoft or on Amazon. And I'm not saying they couldn't do it if they wanted to, and there's probably arguments that might say that they do, but I mean, you just even look at something like workflow. There's not a common workflow across the Microsoft platform. There's not a common workflow across the Amazon platform. You still have to be worried about, operations, Kubernetes, and how do you expand things, and how do you scale things, and virtual machines and all of that. And I'm just a believer in, like, we don't need that. I don't want that. I just want to get my job done, right?
Well, there's something that I've also said for a long time: you can't govern what you don't know about.
Right.
And irrespective of the strengths and weaknesses of various platforms, most large enterprises are going to have a multitude of environments. Mm-hmm. And the extent to which you can, on a single platform, consolidate things, know about things, be able to govern them, to be able to make changes quickly. When we think about the stakes that are involved with this, new digital enterprise, that's going to be really important. Right. And so, it's about simplicity, it's about automation, it's about user experience. Exactly. And, the extent to which, as we're thinking about our new digital enterprise, we can do those things, organizations will be better off if you can move in that direction.
Right, right. And I think I just had this is more me than Gary, but I kind of wanted to put a few points down just to sort of summarize some of the things I've been thinking about, and ask you guys to think about as you evolve your own identity strategies. My first point was zoom out. Like, I really think that identity access management, identity governance should be part of your digital stack, and not apart from your digital stack. And what I mean by that, it's pretty simple. If you have a platform that has the digital enterprise, if you're building a digital enterprise like what Gary's talking about, your identity capabilities, your governance capabilities, your workflow capabilities, your access request, your user experience, all of that should be part of your digital platform. And you should look at that from a serious perspective as to whether or not you can achieve your identity goals, your identity strategy based on that. If you can, explore it. If you can't, it's good to know what's missing and why you can't do it, but you shouldn't miss that opportunity. I say evolve here. This is much longer term because I think we've got a longer time horizon on things like no code and low code. But that is what is going to evolve into how I think IT groups work closer with the business and have the business actually sit in there and work with them and do workflows themselves and do drag and drop. I mean, we're almost at that point. In fact, I think we're at that point in some ways right now. And then the last part of that I wanted to mention was, standardize. Whether it's, the workflows, whether it's the bots, the authorization, authentication, operations, et cetera, they should all be part of the digital stack. They should be all part of the digital enterprise that we've been talking about this morning. Stop reinventing the wheel. I was having that discussion just around LDAP earlier today. Why are we reinventing the LDAP wheel? We've been doing that for 35 years now. I mean, that's basically my thinking and my advice to the folks that are looking. And Gary, I don't know if you had any other words you wanted to get, and then we'll maybe see if there's anybody still on that want to ask some questions.
Yeah. So what a lot of this comes down to, I believe, as we move forward, is our ability to simplify and to provide a better user experience. Right. We've done projects on the consulting side at TechVision with several global 1,000 companies. I had a lot of interactions with folks that run lines of business and folks that are, at a CIO or CISO level. Mm-hmm. And one of the messages that I think correctly has consistently been coming back is user experience. And when we think about user experience, so when we think about workflows and bots and authorization, authentication, and so forth, how do we simplify things? Mm-hmm. One of the pitches that I will not give today, given our time frame, but I think it fits into this, is when we extend out to a digital enterprise from the identity, authorization, authentication side, we're starting to collapse under our own weight. Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, think about the hundreds of IDs and passwords and so forth, the ability to consolidate this information, the ability to consolidate while still maintaining requisite security, and the ability to govern is really hard to do. But if we think about the things that are out here, IAM, IGA part of your stack, the ability to standardize, the ability to while we're doing that, think about that user experience. And that's, as I said earlier, it's not just, an end user that's trying to access your customer services, portal. It's your development team. It's your partners. Right. It's, various stakeholders that may be involved in your organization. It's prospective customers, it's throughout the industry, other influencers in the industry. So, our ability to build out, govern, manage, and have kind of a safe and secure digital enterprise is where I think strategically every large organization needs to be going. And, these are some of the tools to help get you there, and maybe the opportunity to, begin to think through these models going forward as we enter 2022 shortly. Right. I do believe it's a great opportunity to look at what we want to be when we grow up, so to speak, at least digitally. Right. Yeah, I think it's a great point. Thanks to Jackson and Clear Skye for giving me the opportunity to dive into this topic. Thanks to everyone for participating. I think it's such an important area, and feel free to drop us a note if you have questions.